doing the research, I'm realizing that a lot of companies are dropping background checks. And this is also a good thing, right? Because this gives more people an opportunity to work. And in years past and decades past, one of the biggest challenges have been, and now I'm specifically talking about, or specifically talking within the African American community, one of the biggest challenges, since we are the most highly incarcerated population in the United States, one of the challenges has always been, hey, I have a criminal record, I can't find a job. Well, companies are making huge strides in hiring the people's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, thank you to everyone who's taken the time out to listen today. It's greatly appreciated. We understand that you could be doing something else with your time, so giving us a few minutes here, well, at least the next 20 to 30 minutes, to allow me to, as I put my glasses on, getting old, y'all, to uncover and discuss some of these issues is greatly appreciated. So we appreciate, everyone again who's supporting the podcast. As always, if this information is valuable and you feel that it's worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast. And then, of course, share the information on your social media networks and within your networks and community. It is greatly appreciated. So today, I'm going to continue the conversation for those of you who listened last week. Last week, I talked about some of the bias that is occurring in regards to job applications and hiring process through AI, artificial intelligence. Just to briefly recap, many companies are utilizing AI in their screening process and also in their interview process and even in their job offer process. And it, in some areas, some of the software that is being used and programs have detected bias in that process, which of course screens out certain candidates for potential employment with companies. So today, I want to talk about companies who are waiving certain requirements in order to hire individuals for particular positions. And not just private companies, but also in the public sector as well, where waivers of drug background checks and also in some cases criminal background checks are, I'm moving my share up there, are being waived as well. So today, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, companies in private and public sector dropping drug and criminal background checks in order to hire employees, right? So now, again, and let me just be very upfront with this. I'm for this. So I want to make sure I state my point. Even though I'm being objective here, I want to make sure that that's clear. I am for dropping background checks and for drug and also criminal background checks in certain cases. Let me give that little caveat, right? There are certain positions that, I firmly believe you need to still do background checks, right? If you're driving a truck, train, plane, car, anything moving, I think you should have a background check, right? In terms of a drug background check, right? Yeah, I mean, I know marijuana is legalized and, in many states, and I get that part of it. And just like alcohol, and you guys listened to my first I think it was my first podcast episode. I'm not a proponent of alcohol either. So it's a drug just like to me, it's a drug just like any other drug. Cocaine, crack, heroin, it's a drug, right? Anything that alters your mind, your mental state, it's a drug. So, I'm against people who drink and drive. So, but let me get back. So, what I'm making my point is that, I am for waiving drug requirements for certain drugs and also criminal background checks, but I'm for them being in place depending on what you do for a living. I think there has to be some type of responsibility regarding that. So, on that standpoint, I'm for it being waived, but also I think that there should be some caveats or some additional requirements in there. But anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about this is, like I said, because last week I was talking about some of the bias in hiring using AI, and doing the research, I'm realizing that a lot of companies are dropping background checks, and this is also a good thing, right? Because this gives more people an opportunity to work. And in years past and decades past, one of the biggest challenges have been, and now I'm specifically talking about, or specifically talking within the African American community, one of the biggest challenges, since we are the most highly incarcerated population in the United States, one of the challenges has always been, hey, I have a criminal record, I can't find a job. Well, companies are making huge strides in hiring, and also in the public sector. And I'll talk about that as well. When I say public sector, I'm talking about government, in hiring individuals who have criminal background checks. Now, like anything else, there's going to be some limits placed on this, right? So I want to be clear. If you've been convicted of, a felony that, murder, something violent, this is not going to be overlooked, right? You're going to have a hard time. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that you don't deserve a second chance if you reform to go through the system. I'm not against that at all, but I just want to make that clear. But for certain crimes that have been committed, especially for younger adults, especially if you made some choices when you were, 18 years old, 20 years old, and now you're, 30 years old, you're 35, 40 years old, you shouldn't still have to be held, in my opinion, to some of those decisions that you've made in terms of not being able to get employment because, you've obviously, especially if to this point in your life, after that incident or two incidents or whatever, you've lived a very clean record and you haven't had any issues, then I have no problem with a person getting the opportunity to work. But getting back, I'm rambling, I know. So companies are waiving background checks. That's what I'm trying to get to. Companies are waiving background checks for drug testing and also some criminal background, some criminal incidents. Why are they doing this? Well, now this is when we get to the why, right? Companies are not just waiving it because all of a sudden we're a progressive country, and we see the wrong in our ways, right? A lot of this is occurring because the job pool, or the pool of candidates, is shrinking, right? In terms of the amount of individuals who are available to work. So what happens when you start having all of these open positions and then you have no one to fill them? Well, we got to start letting some of these requirements that we used to have in place, we have to let some of them go. So what are some of those requirements? Well, one of the first things, and I'm reading here from a article from the New York Times. They did an article back in, and this is actually from 2019, but it was good information, so I wanted to talk about this. They did an article on a bakery in, I believe in New York or in the Bronx, or a bakery in Yonkers, and they talked about this specific bakery where their policy is if you want a job, you come in, put your name on the list, and once we have an opening, we'll give you a call. And it's not just a bakery; it's more like a factory. But their policy is, hey, you put your name on it, we'll call you in, and once we interview you, if we feel that you can, do this job, we'll hire you. And it's a bakery, it's a production facility that gives people, or it's known for giving people, air quote, second chances, right? And that particular theory has proven to work for this particular company, because, as the article details here, they have gone through tons of employees with little to no issues. And these are employees with criminal backgrounds. And the reason I'm stressing this is because there's always been a stigma that if somebody had a criminal background, that he or she is somehow incapable or not worthy of having a paid position at a legitimate organization. And this particular bakery has proven that notion that is totally not the case. And, they've been in business now. I think, how long has this been? Well over 30 years now. So clearly there is a formula in place that if companies decide to hire individuals who have had previous criminal backgrounds, that depending on the position that they're in, that you're hiring for, their background history, in terms of their criminal background history, does not substantiate whether or not they'll be a good or bad employee. Matter of fact, there was a study done by the in Northwestern, by the Kellogg Institute, and they did a study similar to this in terms of looking at looking at applicants who have taken jobs with criminal backgrounds. And in this study, they noted that the turnover rate and they sampled certain businesses, right? And they found that the turnover rate for individuals who had background checks was actually 13% lower than those who did not have criminal backgrounds, right? So for employees who had come to the various companies that they surveyed, they noted that a lot of times those who did not have criminal backgrounds would quit the job or be fired before those who did have a criminal background check. So I'm stating this to say that there is data that supports this notion that having a criminal background is not an indicator to whether you will or will not be a strong employee. Now, again, I want to be clear, I'm talking about specific criminal backgrounds, right? I'm not just saying, like, I'm talking about petty crimes, shoplifting. I'm talking about maybe even if you possibly had a drug offense, you were younger and you were selling small amounts of drugs and things of that nature. Those type of charges don't dictate whether or not you're going to be a successful employee, in my opinion. And also there's data that supports it later on in life. Now, let me also talk about the other side of it. Now, there in this study, and again, I'm reading this article from from Northwestern's, the Kellogg Institute, and they did an article on should you hire someone with a criminal record. They also did note that sometimes it does play a role depending on what job that the person's in. So in a customer service role, if this person has a criminal background, doesn't there's nothing in the data that suggests that a person with a criminal background is not capable of being successful in that role. Now, in positions where there have been sales positions, right, particularly when you're dealing with, transactions, or you're dealing with money and things of that nature, there has been some data that suggests in those type of areas, particularly if a person is coming from a petty larceny or a background that somehow dealt with stealing and things of that nature, that in those roles, particularly maybe in sales roles and stuff like that, sometimes there is an indication that a person with a criminal background check may have a issue in those roles. But again, it's very minor. It's a very minor skew. But in general, most people, based on this study, and again, I'm reading here from the Institute, from the Kellogg Institute, where they did this. The Kellogg School of Management. I keep saying Institute, Kellogg School of Management, where they did this piece, and they basically said that employees with criminal records, their turnover rate is about 13% lower. So it is documented that because a person has a criminal background doesn't necessarily mean that they are not fit for a position, which then goes again to where we're at today. Because today, because of the shortened hiring pool in terms of candidates, many companies are looking at are hiring people because they don't have enough candidates. And again, this is a lot of these jobs are what is considered to be low skill jobs, which I don't even like to say that. I'm not going to say that, but these are jobs that they feel that are not, this is not the CEO of American Airlines, right? I'm just throwing something out there, right? These are lower grade jobs. So criminal backgrounds can then be waived. Obviously, as you go up in the ranks and you start to get different responsibilities, there's going to be some scrutiny if you have a criminal background. Okay. Now, drug backgrounds. So I'm off of criminal. Now I'm going to drug background. Drug background checks are being dropped by some of the largest companies. I mean, Amazon is one of the more documented ones that have dropped background checks for the majority of their employees. Now, again, their drivers and people that in their transportation department and other roles still have to have a background check if they decide to work. I mean, a drug check or drug background check or drug testing, I should say, if they decide to work at that organization. But many companies are letting this go. And obviously with marijuana being now legalized, I mean, I think it's 40 states where it's medical marijuana is legal, and now 20 states already have legalized it for recreational use. It's obviously more and more difficult to screen someone for drug use. Now, this is not to say that drug testing is stopping, right? They're still doing drug testing. It's just that depending on the drug of choice, right, you can still be hired by many of these companies. And it says here, I'm reading in a article from Yahoo Finance. They did an article on this, and they say the number of companies testing for marijuana dropped 10% in states where marijuana is now legal. But remember, it's still federally illegal. So again, you can drop it in, companies that operate in certain states where it's legal, they can drop those requirements. But remember, marijuana is federally still illegal. So what jobs require it? Where you will be tested for drugs. Obviously, if you are driving a truck, and I keep saying this, but Department of Transportation, they require, for you to have your CDL and things of that nature. You can't fail a drug test. You'll lose your CDL, you'll lose your license, and you can't drive. Obviously, if you're flying a plane, right, a pilot needs to have a drug background check. But if you're working the pallets at the Amazon warehouse, might not be a requirement, right? I mean, you are driving a pallet truck around the warehouse, but again, if you're putting boxes together or you're a package handler, drug testing is not necessary. And this is not just for Amazon. This is not just for public companies. These are also for private. I mean, this is not just for private companies. This is also public companies as well. You have the United States Post Office, especially during the pandemic, dropped a lot of their drug background requirements. even in certain branches of the military, you can get a waiver if you had previous use of drugs or previously been tested for using drugs. You can get a waiver. Now, the waiver, there's a lot that goes into getting a waiver, so I don't want people to think, especially those who want to go to the military, oh, I just get a waiver and I'm good. No, there's still a requirement behind it, but many public sectors of the government are also beginning to waive drug, specifically marijuana requirements, because it is becoming legal. Matter of fact, let me play this piece from KHOU in Houston. They talked about this in terms of what companies are now doing to entice some of the employees to work for them. And one of the ways that they're doing this is by dropping background checks. So let's take a listen to this.
A survey done by Manpower Group, a staffing firm, found that 9% of companies were eliminating the tests to attract and retain talent. This comes as many companies in states with legal recreational marijuana were already considering doing away with screening for pot. In fact, the country's second largest employer, Amazon, did away with most testing for marijuana back in June. Bloomberg reported the company believes screening for pot use cut the pool of potential workers by 30%. Other companies are quieter about their policy. One employment lawyer told Bloomberg Law that companies were dropping tests for marijuana, but they didn't want to advertise the change.
Now, as you heard there, Amazon, as I mentioned, is one of the largest employers who dropped it because they felt like they were screening out potential candidates. And again, the job candidate pool is so tight in the job market that we're in. That's one of the marijuana screenings, is one of the screenings that they dropped in order to ensure that they have a sufficient pool of candidates to work at their positions. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. You know, I wanted to talk about this particular situation or this particular instance because I know that for many years, many people have felt like especially those who have had previous encounters in terms of criminal backgrounds and also in terms of drug use, may feel like they don't have the ability to move on from those choices and gain employment. If anything comes out from this podcast, please share with everyone that you know that many companies, large companies, and as noted in that piece from KHOU in Houston, a lot of these companies don't publicize it. So don't screen yourself out from a potential opportunity because of the previous mistakes or decisions that you've made, because a lot of these companies need workers. Companies are desperately searching for workers. So employment at this point is very, very attainable. And if you had a previous background check, if you had a previous background in either drug use or criminal use, especially if you were just charged from the criminal side, because, and I did a piece on this as well, most convictions, people get charged with felonies, but only like 25% actually get convicted. So even if you had a charge, but you didn't get convicted, technically you still can work, and that can be either expunged from your record. You can talk to a lawyer about that, or you can actually still have that, even though that's in your background, you can still get a job, even with a felony charge listed in your background check. And also a lot of states now have ban the box rules, which basically is a rule where they can't ask you if you've been, charged with a felony. As previous decades, they could ask you that. Many states have what they call ban the box, which doesn't allow an employer to ask you that question anyway. So what I want to, again, from this, everyone get the word out that if you have family members, friends, people in your community that are looking for work, that have had some previous indiscretions in the past, this is an excellent time for them to start seeking out companies to go and work for these companies, because employment is readily available, and screening for marijuana and also screening for background checks in terms of criminal background checks are being waived. So take advantage of that. And, listen, one job could change your life. I've seen it happen tons of times. So take advantage of that opportunity. So that is my time for today. As always, I hope this information was enlightening. If so, feel free to share it. You can leave a comment as well. You can get me on my social medias. You can reach me on social media. I'm at I am Trey Evans on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach me at LinkedIn at Trey Evans. And also you can leave a comment on the show podcast Instagram, which is the People's Voice Podcast. The People's Voice Podcast. So as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. I am Trey Evans. The People's Voice.